Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's ASI webinar. My name is Jay Parsons. I'm one of your hosts for this evening. I'm a professor in the Department of Agricultural Economics and the director of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Joining me as co-hosts this evening are Dr. Jim Logan and Amy Hendrickson with the ASI Animal Health Committee. So welcome to both of you. We're also joined by tonight's speaker, Catherine Piper of Five Pillars Butchery House in Unity, Maine, and she's going to be speaking to us on this topic of growing for the ethnic market, the ins and outs of halal slaughter. So welcome to Catherine. We're looking forward to your presentation here in a couple of minutes. This evening's webinar is brought to you by the American Sheep Industry Association with funding support from the USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, or APHIS. We want to thank both of them for their support. Furthermore, we want to encourage you to visit the ASI website to learn more about the sheep industry and to access the large volume of resources available there to help you be successful in the sheep business. The URL for the ASI website is www.sheepusa.org. If you're not currently a member of the American Sheep Industry Association, I'd like to encourage you to become one. Most people do that by joining their state sheep association. A list of the contact people for those associations is available on the ASI website under the contacts link. I'd like to remind our listeners that this webinar is being recorded. All webinar registrants will receive a follow-up email within the next 48 hours with a link to the webinar recording, as well as a link to access the webinar slides. A link to all these materials will be posted on the ASI website in the educational materials. We're slated this evening for probably about 45 minutes of presentation time, give or take a little bit, and then we'll have a good Q&A session to follow that. So feel free to submit questions at any time during the presentation. We'll monitor those. You can type those into the question dialog box at the bottom of your control panel at any time. We'll handle all of those questions during the Q&A session after the presentation, though. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Jim Logan for some words from the ASI Animal Health Committee. So Dr. Jim.
Thank you, Jay, and welcome everybody. We appreciate you tuning in this evening. On behalf of Dr. Cindy Wolf, who is my co-chair as chairs of the ASI Animal Health Committee, we want to thank and welcome Catherine Piper, our speaker, and we also want to thank USDA APHIS for funding this webinar through our Scrapie Cooperative Agreement. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amy to introduce our speaker.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And I think Catherine has been introduced pretty well here. I just wanted to say that one of the common questions that we get is when we talk about, for instance, scrapie identification, is how identification is viewed, how ear tags are viewed in ethnic markets. And in talking with Linda Detweiler at USDA and Stephanie, they said, I asked about it, and they felt that it might be a good idea for me to reach out to someone who was familiar with halal processing and how to find out how it is viewed. And they recommended Catherine. And so they had also heard a similar presentation from her and had found it to be very interesting and really recommended to us that we speak with her and engage her. And so I did, and I've had a great time getting to know her a little bit and to learn about this, and I hope that everyone finds this to be interesting and helpful. And so I will turn it now over to Catherine to give her presentation. Thank you for joining us, Catherine.
Thanks, Amy, and good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine Piper. I'm part owner of Five Pillars Butchery with my husband, Hussam El Rawi. We started our business back in 2017, and we are expanding. We just received some USDA funding from the MPEP Phase 2 grant program, and we are going to be expanding our facility from custom slaughter to USDA. Will be one of the few halal slaughter facilities in New England. And so I just want to thank you all for coming to hear our presentation. First, I have to read a disclaimer. Five Pillars Butchery would like to thank the USDA for funding this educational webinar and all those participating today. The views and opinions expressed in this webinar are Five Pillars Butcheries and do not reflect the opinions of the USDA. So I'm sure many of you have a vague idea about halal, but today we're going to go a little deeper into what exactly does halal mean. Halal is an Arabic word that means permissible, and its opposite is haram, or forbidden. Halal includes sets of prescribed rules based in Islamic ethics, which Muslims must follow. Most notable among them are dietary guidelines pertaining to food consumption and the way in which an animal is slaughtered, like the term kosher in Judaism. Halal can also pertain to business practices, which include business transparency and ethical investments. Some examples of haram or forbidden food are alcohol, pork, and blood, as well as the consuming of animals that were dead prior to slaughter, animals that were killed in impermissible ways, such as bludgeoning, or animals that were slaughtered without the prayer. Other examples of haram foods include gelatin and most animal-based rennet, because the animals are most often not slaughtered halal or kosher. Hunting is permissible and falls into its own subcategory of halal. All food is halal except that which has been mentioned in the Holy Quran. O you who believe, eat of the good things we have provided for you, and give thanks to God if it is Him that you serve. Prohibited for you are carrion, blood, the flesh of swine, and animals dedicated to other than God. Also the flesh of animals strangled, killed violently, killed by a fall, gored to death, mangled by wild animals, except what you rescue, and animals sacrificed on altars, and the practice of drawing lots, for it is immoral. Why halal slaughter? This first reason is the first and last reason needed for a Muslim to eat halal. It is a religious obligation for Muslims, as stated in the Holy Quran. And do not eat of that upon which the name of Allah has not been mentioned, for indeed it is grave disobedience. Certainly we have brought them a book, the Quran, which we have explained in detail with knowledge, guidance, and a mercy to people who believe. By keeping our faith as the guidance within slaughter process, we maintain the care and the dignity of each animal we pray over. We recognize the life we are taking, and gratefulness to our Creator is our intention throughout the process for the blessings each animal gives. Kindness to animals is mandatory in Islam. I'm going to share with you some sayings of our Prophet regarding animals. There is no man who kills a sparrow or anything beyond that without its deserving it, but God will ask him about it. A good deed done to an animal is as meritorious as a good deed done to a human being, while an act of cruelty to an animal is as bad as an act of cruelty to a human being. Verily, Allah has enjoined goodness to everything. So when you kill an animal, kill in a good way. And when you slaughter an animal, slaughter in a good way. So every one of you should sharpen his knife and let the slaughtered animal die comfortably. Do you intend on inflicting death to an animal twice, once by sharpening the knife within its sight and once by cutting its throat? And avoid those animals that are lactating. So one of the restrictions is slaughtering an animal that has just given birth and is nursing its young. I'm sure many of you recognize this woman, Temple Grandin. So according to Temple Grandin, animal sciences, professor and advocate at Colorado State University, if done properly, religious ritual slaughter is as humane as good conventional slaughter methods. And she said to conduct slaughter without stunning with an adequate level of welfare requires more skill and attention to the details of the procedure compared to slaughter with stunning. From Temple Grandin's research and report, she observed and concluded, if the cattle stay completely calm while kosher, and this was done in a kosher slaughter facility, and kosher and halal are very similar in practice. So if the cattle stay completely calm while kosher slaughter is performed, they flinch slightly at the beginning of the cut. There is no other movement until convulsions start, when sensibility is lost. Immediately after the cut, I loosened the head holder and body restraints. Most cattle looked around for 5 to 60 seconds until they collapsed. They did not seem aware that their throats were cut. Waving my hand in front of the animal's face caused a much bigger reaction than the kosher cut. So I was asked to discuss tagging, so I'm going to discuss it from an Islamic perspective. Many of you may have experienced some pushback about tagging, and so I want to clear some of that up tonight, or hopefully I can give you some additional information that you can move forward with. So there's a lot of confusion and misunderstanding regarding tagging animals for the halal market. These misunderstandings exist among non-Muslim producers and even Muslim customers. For Muslims, this verse in the Quran may be where misunderstanding comes from. I will certainly mislead them and delude them with empty hopes. And just this is Satan saying this to God. I will certainly mislead them and delude them with empty hopes. Also, I will order them, and they will slit the ears of cattle and alter Allah's creation. And whoever takes Satan as a guardian instead of Allah has certainly suffered a tremendous loss. And so I just want to share a little bit about the background on that verse, and it comes from pre-Islamic practices. So these beliefs about tagging and why people may think it's not permissible in Islam come up due to this verse and the misunderstanding of this verse. During the pre-Islamic era, pagan Arabs used to cut the ears of their cattle in dedication to the gods they worshipped. And so there might be some Muslims that don't understand the background and the history of that verse. And so they take it to the extent of any type of marking on the animal is not permissible. But there are other sayings that back up that tagging animals is permissible. So the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, passed by an animal who had been branded on the face, and its nostrils were smoking. The Prophet said, Allah has cursed whoever has done this. Do not brand anyone on the face, nor strike it. And here's another historical situation that I'm going to share. I took Abdullah ibn Abu Talha to the Messenger of Allah to perform tahniq for him, to chew. It's chewing a piece of date and putting it into a newborn child's mouth. It's an energy boost. Anyways, that's a different topic. When I arrived, he had the branding iron in his hand and was branding the camels for the zakat, or the obligatory charity. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, branded his own animals to have an identifying mark on them. And this is a fatwa. A fatwa is a religious ruling regarding a topic that people may have questions about. And this is from, I believe it's from the UAE and their newspaper outlet, Khalij Times. So piercing or marking the ears of cattle for statistical purposes does not render an animal unfit for sacrifice, provided cut is no more than half the size of the ear. In fact, a hadith, prophetic tradition, confirmed the permissibility of marking the cattle for identification purposes. The Prophet, peace be upon him, himself used to brand his cattle to identify them for a purpose of zakat, the fatwa said. And so I just before I keep going, I want to explain there is a difference for sacrificial animals and everyday consumption of meat. And so for sacrificial animals, they should not have any defect on them. So it's preferable to not to dock their tails, not to castrate them, not to cut off horns. They should be in their full state to be a more desirable sacrificial animal. So if you're trying to sell animals for the holiday market, the Eid market, then those other practices, the ones I just mentioned, I think most Muslims would not buy an animal that had their tail docked or they were castrated or their horns were not cut off, but burned off, cauterized when they were born. But in regards to the tagging, that is permissible, as I've just shared with you, per the prophetic tradition and then this fatwa. Many halal slaughter facilities around the country already willingly participate in the USDA's regulatory scrapie slaughter surveillance collection program, through which animals are identified. So they're already taking in animals that are tagged, and we also will slaughter animals that have been tagged. And we slaughter animals outside of the Eid holiday that have been castrated, that have had their tails docked. And so that's not an issue. Even if an ear tag is, accidentally ripped out, like often happens with sheep, that's, as long as it's not for the Eid holiday, that is all perfectly fine for everyday consumption. So reason number 2 we do halal slaughter is because we believe good halal slaughter is humane. Another saying by our prophet, fear Allah in your treatment of animals. Although some countries have made no stun slaughter illegal, forcing the halal meat industry to perform stunning methods prior to slaughter, no stun slaughter is still the preferred method and is allowed under religious exemption in the US. Prior to slaughter, fresh water must be made available for animals to access. No animal should witness the slaughter of another animal, the sharpening of the knife, or the knife itself prior to the slaughter. The animal should be calm prior to slaughter by covering the animal's eyes. The slaughterman must treat the animals well and perform the prayer over every single animal. This prayer is seeking from the creator of that life permission to take that life to provide sustenance. And I want to explain one of the differences. So for halal slaughter, like I just shared, a prayer has to be said over every single animal because the intention has to be made with every single animal taking that life. For kosher slaughter, my understanding is that a prayer is said by a rabbi over the facility for the day, and it's not necessarily over every single animal that's slaughtered. The slaughter should happen in one swift slice with a long, sharp knife by a skilled slaughterman. The animal won't be wasted if more than one slice is performed. So here's another key difference between kosher and halal. Kosher slaughter, it must be one slice. If the animal is not killed within the one slice and more than one has to be performed, it is no longer kosher. It has to be used as something else. In regards to halal, it's preferable and it's important for it to be, one swift slice. But if that's not possible, it doesn't make it not halal anymore. We can still consume it. It's still halal. So what is the process of halal slaughter? So I'm going to read to you some things that should happen for halal slaughter. The religious prayer is said. The carotid arteries on both sides are cut. The jugular veins on both sides are cut. The esophagus and trachea are cut. And the carcass of the animal is not handled in any way until the animal is completely dead, which means loss of eye reflex and the blood is drained. And so what should not happen for halal slaughter? No stun slaughter is preferred. The head should not be removed during slaughter. The vertebrae and spinal cord should not be cut. And again, the carcass should not be handled until all life has left the body. So those are the basics for halal slaughter, but I'd like to share additional details that ensure that the slaughter is a good one. So I'll go through these as quickly as I can. Animals should have a pre-slaughter rest and be well fed and well looked after at the point of slaughter. The condition of the animal upon delivery should reflect good care and health, not necessarily that the animal should have eaten a big meal before being dropped off, but that the animal should be healthy looking, not, emaciated. The animals must be alive at the time of slaughter. Just as, personal background, we've had people request the processing of roadkill and poultry that were dropped off to us dead. And we've turned them down for both hygiene and religious reasons. And I want to mention again that hunting is permissible and halal for Muslims to consume as long as the prayer has been said prior to shooting the animal. So we do process for hunters. We don't eat their meat though, because it's not halal. But if somebody says the prayer before they hunt, before they shoot the animal, then it would be considered halal. Slaughter must be performed by a Muslim who is of sound mind, mature, and fully understands the Islamic procedure and conditions for slaughtering of animals. A Muslim slaughterman is highly preferred for the slaughter, but essential for the prayer. Kosher products are permissible to Muslims, which obviously that would be done by somebody who's Jewish, because it's similar in nature to halal. Animals that are slaughtered should be securely restrained, particularly the head and neck, before cutting the throat. Operator competence is of great importance in order to carry out satisfactory halal slaughter. Tools and other implements used must be for the slaughter of halal animals only. The knife must be razor sharp and without blemishes and damage. The animal's trachea and esophagus must be severed, and the spinal cord should not be cut and the head not severed completely so as to induce immediate and massive hemorrhage. The slice must be done once only. The slaughtering implement must not be lifted off the animal during slaughtering. Any lifting is construed as one act of slaughter. Multiple acts of slaughter on one animal are prohibited. So if you can perform the slaughter with one slice only, that's perfect. If it has to be 2 slices, you simply cannot lift the knife from the animal while you're slaughtering, because that would be considered more than one slaughter. Slaughter the animal in such a way that its life departs quickly and it is not left to suffer. The slaughter must be spontaneous and complete. The animal should not be shackled and hoisted before bleeding. Hoisting should be done only after the animal has lost consciousness. Restraining equipment should be comfortable for the animal. Further preparation and dressing of the carcass must be delayed until all signs of life and cerebral reflex have disappeared. So the next slides might be a little controversial for some. I hope that you can patiently listen and hear why stunning methods are not preferred in halal slaughter. All stunning methods risk the death of the animal prior to slaughter, which is not permissible for halal. In electrical stunning, head-only electrical stunning has the lowest risk of death to ruminants, and this is performed for halal slaughter around the globe. However, Modern experiments are in practice to observe human response to a stimulus, and human models can be used to see the response to electrical stunning. Human electroconvulsive therapy, which is used to treat intractable depression in humans, is comparable to electrical stunning in animals, but ECT has never been used in its unmodified form because of its negative aspects, and medical science considered it a torture. This raises questions regarding the use of electrical stunning in the slaughter of animals. In regards to using electrocution for a death sentence, the Supreme Court determined that the evidence shows that electrocution inflicts intense pain and agonizing suffering. And this was said by Supreme Court Justice William M. Connolly, and when he wrote for the majority in a 6-1 decision in 2008 about electrocution. Mechanical stunning. The fundamental principle of mechanical stunning includes the transfer of kinetic energy to the brain through a moving object, which brings about the dysfunction or destruction of neurons, followed by subsequent unconsciousness. Mechanical stunning of the animal is accomplished by utilizing a penetrating captive bolt or non-penetrative percussion stunner. Captive bolt penetrative stunning is unacceptable from a halal perspective because it causes irreversible damage and can cause brain material to pass into the lungs through the jugular veins. In one of the examples that I gave in one of the first slides, bludgeoning an animal to death, hitting them over the head so hard that you kill them, I would put this into that category because it's a kinetic force being transferred to the head of the animal. So I would consider that bludgeoning the animal. I'm not going to attempt to read the German here. I will slaughter it. But German Veterinary Weekly, volume 85 in 1978, published that a research team from the Hanover University in Germany examined the halal method of slaughtering versus stun method of slaughtering using an EEG and ECG, where electrodes were surgically implanted to various parts of the skull, allowing to monitor the brain and heart throughout. The halal method of slaughtering showed there was no change in the EEG for the first 3 seconds, indicating that the animal did not feel any pain from the cut itself, and the following 3 seconds were characterized like deep sleep. The EEG recording was 0 with no pain at all, yet at the moment the heart was still beating and the body was convulsing vigorously as a reflex reaction of the spinal cord. It is this phase which is unpleasant to the onlookers, who are falsely convinced that the animal suffers whilst the brain no longer records any messages. Using the Western method of slaughtering, the animals were apparently unconscious after stunning and appeared much more peaceful for the onlookers. However, the EEG readings indicated severe pain immediately after stunning, even though there were no unsightly convulsions. There was stoppage of the heart whilst the animal still felt pain. With the halal method, the animal ceased to feel any pain due to the brain starvation of blood and oxygen, or brain death. This study is found on different Islamic councils, including Islamic Services of America. They are a third-party halal certifying body in the US. So reason number 3 for why Muslims do halal slaughter is because it provides a healthier product. In traditional halal slaughter, the animal's spinal cord is undamaged and the animal remains conscious. This allows for the heart to continue beating and active mobility of the animal's limbs. The slice cuts off blood and oxygen flow to the brain. According to the brain and behavioral responses, loss of consciousness occurs in 14 seconds in sheep by severing both jugular vein and carotid arteries without stunning. The heart beating and free movement of the limbs ensures that maximum drainage of blood flow occurs and removes the microorganisms and wastes, thus improving the meat's quality, taste, healthiness, and shelf life. Whereas with stunning, the bleeding is inefficient because stunning impairs the bleeding process. One study showed that cattle slaughtered without stunning had less residual hemoglobin retained in the muscles and better bleeding efficiency than pneumatic-powered stunned cattle. In poultry, the blood volume lost from non-halal slaughtered chickens was significantly lower than from the halal slaughtered birds. Blood undergoes putrefaction quickly due to its high protein content and high pH. In the case of incomplete bleeding and slaughtered bulls, the remainder of the blood stays in the muscles with a pH of about 7, thus leading to an increase in meat pH and water activity of the meat. The increase in pH and water activity facilitate the growth and multiplication of microorganisms that cause spoilage of the produced meat. So the fourth reason for halal slaughter is because it centers our connection with our Creator. And the prayer that we say before slaughtering is Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. So Bismillah translates to in the name of God. And Muslims say Bismillah before starting many things in their day-to-day lives, entering a room, at the beginning of prayer, before eating and drinking, and before slaughtering an animal. And Allahu Akbar translates to God is the greatest. Muslims say Allahu Akbar to express their amazement and to call on God during joyous moments, moments of feeling oppressed, when recognizing the natural beauty in the world, and before slaughtering an animal, seeking permission to take its life. There is an underlying violent nature of working in a slaughterhouse that poses a risk to the psychological well-being of employees. Cases of cumulative trauma disorder have been reported. Furthermore, slaughterhouse employees often lack adequate resources to cope with the strenuous environment. In addition, violence against animals has been linked to psychological health problems in humans. Worker interviews described important indicators of factors leading to PTSD and symptoms of the lesser-known perpetrator-induced traumatic stress syndrome, which is such as increasing dissociation and nightmares. And this is a quote from one of the slaughtermen interviewed. I dream about the cattle. When you stun it, it just falls down. After falling down, when you open the door, it will ask you, why are you killing me? And another quote, one skill that you master while working at an abattoir is disassociation. You learn to become numb to death and to suffering. Instead of thinking about cows as entire beings, you separate them into their saleable, edible body parts. It doesn't it doesn't just make the job easier, it's necessary for survival. Prevalence of serious psychological distress among workers was 4.4% compared to United States population-wide prevalence of 3.6%. And prevalence of mild and moderate psychological distress among workers was 14.6%. That 14.6% was also higher than national estimates. So the next piece I want to share about is prayer and why I think this can help workers have better mental health in this type of work. So rituals in general serve a calming function, said Ryan Bremner, an associate professor of psychology at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. Sorry, I have to move something. They distract the mind, which might otherwise go down one of those rabbit holes of useless worry, and they give us a sense of influence or control over something that may not be. Incorporating prayer and maintaining God consciousness within such physically and emotionally strenuous work can help minimize the negative impacts that many workers within the slaughter industry experience. Prayer can foster a sense of connection, whether it's to a higher power, what a person finds important in life, or their values, Bremner says. Prayer can reduce feelings of isolation, anxiety, and fear as well. A 2009 study on the effects of prayer on depression and anxiety found that members of a group had lower rates of depression and anxiety and were more optimistic after sessions in which they prayed for one another compared to the control group, which had no prayer sessions. Kevin Masters, a professor of clinical health psychology at the University of Colorado, Denver, says, we are now quite aware that psychological experiences are intimately associated with important physiological processes, including immune system functioning. There are strong associations between religiosity and both health and happiness, Bremner said. One large population study led by Harvard professor Tyler Vanderweel found that young adults who prayed daily tended to have fewer depressive symptoms and higher levels of life satisfaction, self-esteem, and positive affect in comparison to those who never prayed. Another study examined the perspectives of over 2,000 adults with mental illness in California, finding that over 80% agreed or strongly agreed that spirituality was important to their mental health. Moreover, over 70% indicated that prayer was helpful to their mental health. Prayer can have a positive impact on recovery from mental illness and also on the well-being of people without mental illness. Additionally, these studies indicate that regular prayer can be especially important for people who are lonely or socially isolated. So in a halal slaughter facility, if you have Muslim workers, Muslim slaughtermen, most of them will, take the time out of the day to pray while they're at work. And so them doing prayer for themselves, them reciting a prayer over the animal before it's slaughtered, everything in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis is centered on our Creator. And so I do believe that it has a greater positive effect on the well-being and mental health of workers. And so the Quran has a number of chapters named after animals and a number of verses about animals, as well as a number of stories about animals. And to end this presentation, I will share one of the most significant verses about animals in the Quran. And the chapter is called The Livestock. There is not a moving, living creature on earth, nor a bird that flies with its two wings, but are communities like you. We have neglected nothing in the book, then unto their Lord they all shall be gathered. And this concludes my presentation. So thank you very much, and questions are welcomed.
Thank you, Catherine. That was very informative, and I learned a lot. So we did have some questions come in, and I guess we'll just start going down the ones that have already come in, and remind our listeners out there that you can submit questions in the question box. If you have something that you'd rather not type in there, or would like to just ask it verbally, you can raise your hand and I can call on you. And of course, you have to have a working microphone for that to work, and because you need to unmute yourself and talk. But with that, let's just go ahead. And a lot of questions on the handling and just the processing side of it. So one question was, how are the animals actually restrained during this process?
Well, it depends on the facility. For our custom facility, we only have the ability to do small ruminants at this time. And my husband, as the slaughterman, he restrains the animals. We don't use devices. So he's interacting with the animal and working with it to make sure that it's calm before he slaughters it. In regards to cattle, because it's not safe to slaughter such a large animal without restraints, it's important for them to be in some type of a restraining box. But for halal slaughter, it should also allow for the head to be restrained and the neck lifted to expose the neck in the best way so that the animal can be slaughtered properly.
Okay, and related to that is just, I don't know, I hesitate to call it capacity to slaughter, but in the description of the webinar that we sent out, it was mentioned that you had received some USDA funding to enlarge your facility. Do you want to talk just a little bit about the capacity to slaughter, like how long it takes, how, what's a reasonable size facility, and your plans for expansion?
Sure. Yeah, so Maine is a little bit different, I think, than a lot of the Midwest when it comes to both farming and slaughter. So we have a lot of small farms and we have a lot of small slaughter facilities. So we would be considered very small by USDA standards, but we will be producing upwards of 800,000 pounds of meat annually at capacity. So that would look like about 3,100 small ruminants and almost 1,000 beef.
Okay, very good. Somebody asked a question about handling of lambs. Can you discuss best practice in handling lambs in a halal slaughter situation? Are they handled a little differently or not?
Well, I guess if, if I'm going to talk from the experience that I know with my husband being a slaughterman, he, will take one of the hooves of the animals and pull it up and gently bring the animal down, to gain control of the animal's body. And he puts it on its side. He makes sure that it's calm. If he has to cover the eyes to make that happen, he'll do that. He'll usually use the ear of the animal over the eye. He will always have the knife sharpened before he, interacts with the animal. He has it set behind him so that the animal is not seeing it, and he will pick up the knife once the animal is calm and he's exposed to the neck. And really, the sheep, he says, the sheep are the easiest. He says they show you their neck asking you to slaughter them. They'll just sit there, and he doesn't have to physically overpower them to slaughter them. So it's I don't want to say a comfortable process, but it's not very invasive to slaughter lambs.
So you said your husband does the slaughtering. Do you ever allow customers to perform the actual sacrifice, or is that very common?
We never have. My husband is very, he wants to ensure that if an animal is being killed in our facility, on our property, in our presence, that it's going to be done the right way. And although any Muslim can slaughter, not every Muslim knows how to slaughter. So if somebody asks him about doing the slaughter, he says, take the knife and show me on my neck where you would slice the animal. And obviously he's, being exaggerative when he says that, but he's saying that to make them understand that if they don't know where to even place the knife, they have no business doing slaughtering. So he's never allowed anybody to slaughter at our facility.
Okay, and I'm sure he does a good job of it, but in case it doesn't, you mentioned that about the one stroke of the knife, and that as long as you don't lift the knife, it's still okay. Could you talk a little bit about what happens to the animals that do not meet halal specifications?
Well, I can't really talk on that, to be perfectly honest with you, because he slaughters them to the standards that are required. And I suppose this is a good conversation to have before we open our USDA facility and other slaughtermen are working there. I suppose it would not be sold as halal. It would be, sold as just meat and not marketed to the Muslim community.
Okay. And somebody did ask a question about the USDA piece of it. Well, I'll just read it to you and you can interpret it how you want. They said, what type of facility considerations are important if you want to incorporate halal slaughter in a USDA facility?
The facility is the same. The consideration would be if you have the right employees. You would have to have Muslim employees doing the slaughtering and handling of the live animals. And if you have access to the Muslim community as consumers, that's great. But if you don't, then I would also recommend having a Muslim or a halal department, for lack of a better term, in your facility so that you have Muslim employees operating that department and interacting with the customer base. Muslims tend to not trust the halal sources. They ask a lot of questions. We've even had customers come to observe the slaughter to ensure that it is halal. We are planning ahead for the facility that we are constructing this year, the rest of this year and into next year. On our second floor, we have a second floor with an observation window down to the kill floor, so that any customer, you know, with pre-approval to go up, they will be able to go up to the observation room and witness the slaughter to make sure that, you know, for their comfort, that it is halal. So I think, you know, we had a facility here in Maine that was doing halal, and none of the owners and none of the managers and none of the people with higher positions were Muslim. Only the slaughterman was Muslim, and they didn't really succeed in the halal market because they didn't have the connections in the community. So that's a very important piece.
Yeah, you hit on a lot of good things there, and it's related to the other question that came in on this, and that they were asking to discuss the cultural expectations on business and negotiation processes. So besides what you've already mentioned, are there other cultural expectations on you as a business person here that is important to mention?
Yeah, I'm smiling here and laughing to myself. So I think Americans and maybe Westerners are very unique in that, like, the price that is set is the price that they pay. But in other cultures, there's a lot of haggling that's going on. There's a lot of negotiation over prices. So I just want to say this: if you have a Muslim customer coming to you to buy an animal or to buy product, don't be offended if they try to negotiate the price. This is a part of their culture. And you can just, you know, very calmly and patiently say, well, this is the price, it's a set price, and you know, I'm happy to sell to you at this price. So you can, you know, you can expect that, and maybe not like, you know, with a, you know, distribution company or a food manufacturing company. You're not, you know, you're not going to deal, well, you may even deal with that, right? Negotiations are typical in business all the time, but I've heard stories from producers who got offended when Muslim customers came and tried to negotiate the price with them. So it's just a cultural difference.
Good information. How do people find halal slaughterhouses? Is there an acceptable way to, or a place where they're registered, a place to look in general?
I don't know if there's a registry, to be honest with you. I Google. when I want to find a halal slaughter facility, I Google. And I think that may be the best way to do it. The second best way to, to contact your Department of Ag and find out, you know, if you're in a state that has state slaughter facilities, or if, you know, USDA slaughter facilities, to ask if there are any halal slaughter facilities in your state.
Okay. We have one listener that asked if you could talk about zabiha. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's pronounced dhabiha, but it's spelled with a Z. Yeah. So what that means is that it's a Muslim slaughterman doing the slaughter per Islamic regulations. The reason people use that phrase, that's what they mean when they use that phrase, because that falls under the category of halal, but kosher is also halal. And so there are some Muslims who don't want to buy kosher because it wasn't done by a Muslim. Just like, you know, a lot of Jews don't eat non-kosher because it wasn't slaughtered by a Jew. And so that's the term dhabiha. It's an assurance that the slaughterman was Muslim and the practice was an Islamic slaughter practice.
Okay. Somebody asked about the calendar and you know, religious holidays and stuff. They said, do you have producers that adjust their breeding and lambing schedules to accommodate the moving calendar? Any recommendations or resources on how to manage that?
Oh gosh, I'm from Maine. And most of our producers around here, they don't keep their slaughter animals through the winter. So that's actually something that we're trying to solve as well. There are some producers that may keep animals through the winter for the Eid celebrations because they know the amount of money that can be made during those seasons, but it's more difficult. You know, you're feeding more animals and they're not castrated and maybe they still have horns. And so if you have the facility to do it, like the farming infrastructure to do that, then you know, I would say go for it. I think producers make a lot of money during those times of year. Excuse me, because they can charge more, especially for an animal that is intact and not, you know, marked or has a scar or you know, cut ear, right? They can go for a lot higher price.
And related to that, are there Muslim holidays where individuals are supposed to slaughter the animal they are to consume?
Sorry, can you say the last part?
It said, are there Muslim holidays where individuals are supposed to slaughter the animal they are to consume?
I see. Technically, no. So a Muslim can ask for an animal to be slaughtered on their behalf by another Muslim. So this would be called qurbani, and this is the sacrificial slaughter during the Eid holiday. And so it's the prayer is slightly different. There is a person that this sacrifice, the blessings. So when you sacrifice an animal for the holiday or for charity, you're giving away the meat. It's not all for you. So you share a third to the needy and you share a third to your family and your neighbors, and you can keep a third for yourself. And so that sacrifice is dedicated to a certain person. It can be the person who is requesting for the slaughter. It can be a family member. It could be anybody in their life. And so that prayer is done in such a way where that person's name is mentioned as a part of the slaughter prayer. So that person does not have to do that slaughter by themselves. Somebody else can do it as long as they're Muslim.
Okay, very good. We have a couple of questions on different animal species. The first one had to do with pork or pigs, you know, being on the list of the haram food. Is that, did I say that correctly?
Close, it's haram, not harem, haram.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I can't pronounce people's names, let alone all the different words. But anyway.
That's all right. It's just there's a really big difference between the two words.
Oh, good. Well, I'll figure that out then. Sure.
Okay.
Anyway, so what about pig slaughter? Is it not allowed in the facility at all? Is it just not allowed on the same day? What are some of the restrictions on the facility itself in regards to pork?
Yeah. So for us, obviously, we won't do any pork because we'll be an exclusively halal slaughter facility. There are other slaughter facilities that do pork, but you should be very you have to separate them very drastically if you want to develop a trusting relationship with the community that you're serving. So for example, do them on complete, you know, do the slaughter on complete opposite days, do the processing on complete opposite days, start your week off with the halal, you know, and always start with the halal, even if it's the same, even if you're doing sheep and, you know, half your day is going to be halal and half your day is going to be non-halal. Start with the halal because you don't have to clean anything to continue with the non-halal. But if you start with the non-halal, you have to clean your processing equipment, your slaughter equipment, before you work on the halal meat. So my recommendation is to start with the halal first.
Okay. And then the other question was, you're about to start doing beef, right, with this expansion,
Yeah.
and facility considerations, given that you're, obviously got a much different sized animal and things that you're planning on doing there, and any group movement, space, single file, double file, alloway, anything you want to say there in terms of the setup and how that is going to affect your operation.
Well, it's in a completely new building, so our entire operation is going to change. But we're going to be using a slaughter box or a squeeze chute that has a chin lift to expose the neck. And I think the handling it's similar to other facilities. The only difference with halal slaughter is that the prayer is set over the animal, and all the other smaller pieces, right? You're not sharpening the knife in front of the animal. You're not going to stun or shoot the animal first. You're not necessarily going to be skinning another cow right in the vision of the other cow that's about to be slaughtered. You take a little more precaution in the care of what the animals are witnessing, and then you say the prayer, and everything after that, everything before that and everything after that are the same.
Okay, and I've been at some facilities where they actually played a recording. I don't know what I was witnessing, to be honest, but it was just a recording. Is that permissible in some cases, or is that, what was I seeing there?
Yeah, you were seeing Islamic slaughter fitting into the mass slaughter industry. I would not. We don't like to. We raise the animals that we consume for the most part, and a recording being said over an animal, there's no intention in that for each animal. The recording may miss an animal, right? If it's a poultry facility and they're doing hundreds of birds in a minute, right? How quickly does that have to be, that prayer has to be said over every single animal, right? So I think that this is a difficult topic, because third-party halal certifiers will certify a facility that uses a recording, but I can tell you that if the Muslim community knew this is what was going on, most of them probably wouldn't eat the meat. They just don't know.
Okay, thanks. I was wondering that.
Sorry.
It struck me right away because I know that's what I saw. But so there was a couple of more questions. I think we could squeeze them in here. One of them was the size and the age. Is there a preference on them in terms of halal slaughter of the sheep in particular? But
yeah, that's a good question. So at any point, the animal should be at least 6 months old for small ruminants, and might be like 9 months or something for larger ruminants, cows and camels and stuff. This is obviously for multiple reasons. One, to make sure that the animal is worth, taking its life. It's going to give enough meat to people. And two, it's lived its life, to a certain extent before it's slaughtered. It's weaned, it's weaned from its mother. It's not, nursing still. And so I would say that's a general guideline for age. When it comes to the holiday slaughter, that animal should be a year old or older. If people cannot find animals that are a year old or older, younger animals are allowed, but only if they can't, find the older ones. And then it depends on the community that you're serving. and the way that the processing is being done. So for example, the Pakistani community, they process their meat in a certain way, and they like them to be a little bit on the younger side so that it's quicker to cook. But you know, the West African community, they don't mind having older animals because they, you know, cook the animal for longer. They cook the meat for longer. Sorry, not the animal. They're cooking the meat for longer periods of time, and that's so. You should probably research a little bit about the community that you want to serve to understand what they're looking for.
Okay, and then the last question that came in was, do you have customers that pick up hot carcasses? And looking at your USDA expansion, is that a concern with any inspectors you've talked with?
So USDA facilities can do non-inspected slaughter. They would just schedule that with the inspector. We have done that for customers that requested it. It's hot carcass. We do it right on the hook. And they put it into a bag and they put it into their cooler and they take off. And we anticipate having customers that still want that despite, you know, having a USDA facility. So we're going to operate that on the weekends without the inspector, you know, needing to be there, and the customer can come and pick out the animal that they want. And then we will process it or slaughter it and quickly process it right then and there for them.
Okay, well, thank you. And thank you for a great presentation and for your great answers to all these questions. And thanks to our audience for bringing them in. Jim and Amy, if either one of you wants to close out with some comments, I'll just end with my comments, reminding everybody that we do have this being recorded, and you will get a follow-up email with the link to that recording. I'll also include a link to these webinar slides. We will post those so that you could review some of those if you have questions that maybe you'd like to ask. So Jim, I think I'll turn it over to you to close us out here then.
Okay, Jay, we thank you, number one, for doing a great job of facilitating. You always do a good job for us. Also, thank you to Catherine. That was a great presentation. It's been very interesting, and it does help all of us to understand some cultural differences and issues. So thank you for taking your time to prepare the presentation and for being here tonight. That's all I have, Jay.
Okay. Amy?
I would just echo what Jim said. Catherine, I thought it was really interesting. I also appreciated all of the people who submitted questions. I think that really added to this evening, and I learned a lot and really enjoyed it. So thank you.
I'd just like to thank you all for welcoming me here and asking me to do this presentation, and for everybody that stuck around to the very end.
You did good.
All right.
Thank you.
And I do see that Linda from USDA has her hand up. And Linda, you asked to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, and I wanted to thank Catherine too. I'm the one that suggested, I'm with USDA APHIS, suggested that she speak. And the reason we did is that our regulatory scrapie slaughter surveillance, which is so essential for surveillance for USDA to get the samples we need to show that we don't have scrapie anymore in the US. So hopefully, knock on wood. But we rely heavily on the halal plants because they're big consumers of adult animals, which we need to get adult sheep and goats for our slaughter surveillance program. So we had Catherine speak to our field people that go out and do this collection, and we thought it would be good for the industry so that it was very helpful for us to understand more about the traditions and our interactions in those plants. So thank you, Catherine, and thanks ASI for sponsoring this.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, with that, I'll go ahead and sign off, and once again, thanks for the great presentation, Catherine, and everybody that joined us this evening, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening and rest of your summer.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Jay.